Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. The Bank of Canada drops its key interest rate by 1/4 point, but warns the shock of Trump's tariffs could send Canada into a recession. Plus, new data shows last year's Jasper wildfire was the second costliest in Canadian history. And it's the year of the snake, as billions around the world celebrate the Lunar New Year.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Bank of Canada's latest interest rate cut will see the central bank reducing its policy rate by 1/4 percentage point to 3%. The additional cut comes as the U.S. continues to threaten 25% tariffs on all Canadian imports starting in February. Canada's economic outlook is clouded by the uncertainty brought on from the tariffs, with the bank revising its GDP forecast to growth by 1.8% in 2025 and 2026. That is down from its previous projections of 2.1 and 2.3%. Governor of Canada's central bank, Tiff Macklem, says Canada's economic outlook is pushing the country into uncharted waters amid the uncertainty of tariffs.
There's a lot we don't know. We don't know what new tariffs will be imposed, when, or how long they will last. We don't know the scope of retaliatory measures or what fiscal supports will be provided. And even when we know more about what is going to happen, I do need to be clear, it's still going to be difficult to be precise about the economic impacts because we have little historical experience with tariff changes of the magnitude that the U.S. is contemplating.
The Bank of Canada says if Trump imposes the tariffs on February 1st, the shock might be large enough to send Canada into a recession. And speaking of that February 1st date, today Alberta Premier Danielle Smith made it clear that all of Canada needs to act on border security immediately prior to the February 1st deadline when Trump is believed to commence tariffs. Smith says the province sent a Black Hawk helicopter to monitor Alberta's border with Montana, along with several other measures to make good with the United States on critical border issues, such as cracking down on illegal drugs and illegal immigration, issues that Trump said were the reason for imposing tariffs if Canada does not take action.
That is why why we also sent a Fox News crew to the Coots border today to showcase the work Alberta has been doing to secure our border, including the establishment of a new interdiction patrol team within the Alberta Sheriffs to combat drug smuggling, gun trafficking, and other illegal activities along Alberta's 298-kilometer international boundary with the United States. This interdiction team will be supported by 51 uniformed officers equipped with carbine rifles, weapons for tactical operations, 10 support staff, including dispatchers and analysts, 4 drug patrol dogs, 10 cold weather surveillance drones capable of operating in high winds with dedicated pilots, 4 narcotics analyzers to test for illicit drugs. Additionally, Alberta's government will create a 2-kilometer deep critical border zone deemed critical infrastructure, allowing sheriffs to arrest individuals attempting to cross the border illegally or traffic drugs or weapons without the need for a warrant.
Trump's Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, said on Wednesday afternoon that if Canada and Mexico act swiftly to address their border concerns, they can avoid tariffs, calling it instead an action of domestic policy. And as the deadline looms, Conservative MP for Lethbridge, Rachel Thomas, says a Canada-first approach is needed in dealing with the threats. The Conservative Party has a plan that she believes would protect Canadians while sending a clear message to the U.S.
Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, has been really clear on how he would do that. So he would go after things that we don't need, things that we make ourselves here in Canada, things that we can buy elsewhere from other trading partners. And so in going about it in that way, what would happen is we would make sure that Canadians are protected and that they're not harmed in the process. But it would certainly send a clear message to the United States that we can't be bullied, we can't be pushed around.
Catch my full interview with MP Rachel Thomas coming up later in the program. As Canadians brace for tariffs, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce has been in discussion with their chambers across the country. The Chamber of Commerce here in Lethbridge says they are watching closely over whatever may happen, but are continuing to communicate with their U.S. counterparts. BCN's Landon Hickok has more on that story.
According to the Canada-United States Trade Tracker on the Canadian Chamber's Business Data Lab website, $3.6 billion of trade is passed along the border on a daily basis. In Alberta, $133 billion in mineral products, particularly oil and natural gas, was shipped to the U.S. in 2023. Cindy Crane of the local Chamber of Commerce is in discussion with chambers across the country in anticipation for Saturday, when the tariffs are expected to drop.
We've been working with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and we actually had a pan-Canadian forum on Monday morning and reviewed what the possibilities could arise, right? Because we still are not sure. So if you think about where we're located, our border right on down to Great Falls, we have a close relationship with our Montana Chamber partners, but we're really looking at it from an Alberta to Montana's proposition rather than just say a Lethbridge and Great Falls. If we do dollar for dollar tariffs, they're going to have problems as well. They're going to be affected. So they're concerned just as much as we're concerned. And with uncertainty, where do we go?
The potential tariffs could cost each Canadian $1,900 if retaliatory measures are implemented alongside. But Crane says it's not just tariffs abroad they need to focus on, but cooperation within our borders.
There is some hesitation, but we're not just worried about trades right now. We're also worried about what's going on with our federal government. We don't have one in play really right now. And so concerns over that, concerns over delay of not having anything really known till March, and then concerns about what will go then. So the other conversations we've been having a lot on is interprovincial trade. Let's strengthen that. Let's not make that messy. We're actually at our board meeting tomorrow, we're going over an interprovincial policy on what we can do as this province to be a real leader in the business sector on making sure supply chain is going from one end of our country to the other end of the country, because there's so much potential that made in Canada to stay in Canada, and we just haven't done that. So that is a priority.
For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
Thank you, Landon. And Trump's tariffs seem to also be one of the key issues as Ontario voters get ready to head to the polls in a rare winter election. And as the Canadian Press reports, there are 3 key issues in this election campaign. Here is Brenda Molina-Navida.
For Doug Ford, Trump and tariffs will be the top issue of the campaign and the one he is likely to focus on. And he likely hopes voters will focus on it too. Amid political chaos in Ottawa, the provincial leader has been at the forefront of Canada's pushback as Trump threatens 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. He has said that American tariffs will deeply hurt Ontario's economy, in particular the auto sector. And he expects he would have to spend tens of billions of dollars to counter those effects. The opposition parties say they would support such stimulus measures, rendering an election unnecessary. Healthcare is a perennial election issue, and this campaign promises to be no different. Though where in recent elections there has been a lot of talk about hallway healthcare and emergency medicine, the need for more family doctors is expected to dominate this time. The Ontario College of Family Physicians has estimated that 2.5 million people in the province do not have a family doctor, and that number is only expected to grow. Housing was top of mind during the 2022 election campaign, with the Progressive Conservatives vowing to build 1.5 million homes in 10 years. After forming government, they continued to make it a top issue, even as the agenda became derailed by the Greenbelt scandal, subsequent ministerial resignations, and reversals of housing policies.
In other news, the Insurance Bureau of Canada says a ferocious wildfire that swept through Jasper, Alberta last summer caused an estimated $1.2 billion in insurance damages. That's up from an initial estimate of $880 million, citing data from analysis firm Cat IQ. The Bureau says the Jasper blaze was the second costliest fire event in Canadian history. Flames destroyed a third of the Rocky Mountain community, and the Bureau says more than 92% of those properties now have an approved demolition permit from Parks Canada. The City of Calgary says shovels will be hitting the ground this year on a multi-billion-dollar light rail transit project connecting the city's southeast to downtown. City Council voted to move forward with the Green Line after working out a new alignment with the province. The United Conservative Party government had said it would pull its $1.5 billion in funding if changes weren't made to a previous version that would have tunneled under downtown run a shorter distance. Alberta opposition NDP leader Naheed Nenshi calls it a, quote, exceptionally sad day, saying the approved route ignores years of earlier study and would have next to no ridership. Here in Lethbridge, nearly $100,000 has been raised so far to support the Becude family after their 3 small children were struck by a vehicle on the way to school last week. Akira Coel, the organizer of the fundraiser on behalf of Mark Becude, has given updates about the health of the children who, according to Coel, had already crossed the road when someone struck them and that a bystander called 911. BCN reached out to Coel, who also said the surgeries were successful for both Marcus, aged 14, and Juliana, aged 8. Juliana's surgery ran into a few complications, but she and Marcus are slowly healing. Coel shared on social media that there is a Facebook account that she is pretending to be hers. She also clarified that Coel has not sent messages to anyone asking for money or personal information and encouraged those who want to donate to use the GoFundMe account. Valentine's Day is approaching quickly, and with it, the time to remember that we need to give and receive love. For this reason, Interfaith Food Bank is launching the Romance Raffle Initiative, which seeks to raise funds to put food on the table of those in need. The CEO for Interfaith Food Bank, Danielle McIntyre, says those who participate by purchasing tickets can win prizes ranging from a jacuzzi suite and dinner to a diamond ring. McIntyre gives more details about the raffle, valued at nearly $8,000.
We are selling tickets online at $20 a piece or 3 for $50, and all of the proceeds will directly support Interfaith Food Bank. The most valuable part of the package is obviously this beautiful diamond ring, but we've also coupled it with a stay at the Salmon Signature Lodge in a nice jacuzzi suite and dinner at the Italian table, as well as a few other nice little things to make the night romantic. We are going to need to be fundraising all year. We're expecting our demand to stay high, if not increase by about another 15%. We're also projecting to see food costs increasing between 3 to 5%. So raising money is our top priority. And so this is our first big fundraiser of the year, and we're looking forward to people participating. We are projecting to raise at least an extra $100,000 this year, more than we did last year. Our total budget that we're hoping to bring in is over $1.7 million.
McIntyre says 250 tickets for $20 or packages of 300 tickets for $50 are available. In international news, Eastern Congo rebels claim they have captured a key city. The Associated Press explains that forces of the Democratic Republic of Congo were losing control of the key city of Goma on Wednesday after rebel groups backed by Rwanda took over the airport and shared plans to set up a new administration.
Congo's eastern capital of Goma, a strategic city at the heart of a mineral-rich region, was plunged into chaos this week after a rebel group claimed control of the city on Monday. Goma and surrounding towns have long served as a refuge for those fleeing the surrounding conflict, which has raged for decades. Congo alleges that the Rwanda-backed rebels, known as M23, want to take control of the country's natural resources. But Rwanda says that Congo is protecting perpetrators of the 1994 genocide who fled into Congo years ago fearing reprisals. Gaining control of eastern Congo for Rwanda and M23 is seen as an attempt to protect the Tutsi population in the region. M23 is one of the many groups vying for power in eastern Congo. Briefly gaining control of Goma in 2012, the group launched another offensive in 2022 and took several key towns in recent weeks. Fighting reached Goma by Sunday, and videos circulating on social networks Monday showed soldiers said to be M23 walking in the streets. The city was calm Wednesday, while pockets of town continued to be controlled by the Congolese army. And others, M23 soldiers are circulating freely and seem to be cementing their control over Goma.
Well, here's some fun news. China's Lunar New Year kicked off today with New Year festivals and prayers, marking the start of the Year of the Snake around Asia and across the globe. In Beijing, people crowded the Lama Temple at dawn, while big crowds also flocked to temple fairs across the city. Beginning last Friday, travel kicked into high gear with 9 billion trips expected over the weekend. The government estimated over 270 million cross-country travels were made, with 14.2 million of them traveling by train. The 40-day mass migration is considered to be the world's biggest annual movement of humanity. Wow, looks like so much fun to celebrate that Lunar New Year. Well, back here in southern Alberta, we saw double-digit temperatures today, but lots of wind. Will that wind stick around, though? Well, I'll be back later to tell you all about it. Once again, lots of wind and lots of warmth on this late January day, but will that wind stick around? That is the question. Today we saw those wind gusts up to 90 kilometers per hour. Tonight we will see gusts up to 40, then 60, then 80 Overnight low of 3, though, not bad at all for this time of year. And then more double digits tomorrow as well. Thursday, high of 10 degrees, 9 on Friday, 8 degrees on Saturday. Beautiful sunny skies, and then everything's about to drop for Sunday as that low pressure system rolls in. So minus 14, the expected high on a Sunday, and then we're going to be seeing way drop down, like really, we're going to dip right down there. Minus 25 for Sunday night, and we're going to see chance of flurries, so 60% chance on Monday, 70% chance on Tuesday, with highs of minus 20 and minus 16 respectively. So average high for this time of year, 0. Average low, minus 12, 17. Average high, or sorry, that was the record high on this day that happened back in 1940. 1929, we were sitting at a crazy minus 43. That was the record low on this day. Sun rose this morning at 8:08. Sunset tonight at 5:22 p.m. So we are well after 9 hours of daylight. Days are definitely getting longer. Okay, showers expected tomorrow in Victoria. High of 5 degrees. A low pressure system is making its way to the coast of BC, bringing with it some flurries and actually showers and wet flurries. Also, there are some highway alerts along the Sea to Sky Highway there. Hope to Merritt, 3 degrees for the daytime high in Vancouver. High of 1 degree in Edmonton tomorrow, with 2 to 4 centimeters of snow expected. Sunshine in Calgary tomorrow with a high of 9 degrees and only up to 30 winds. Why do they get off so easily with the Lethbridge and our 80 winds tomorrow? The rest of the prairies here, Saskatoon sitting at minus 3, chance of flurries. Mix of sun and cloud expected in Regina, minus 5 there. Minus 2 expected in Winnipeg tomorrow with clear skies. Now, as we get to the central part of the country here, we are expected to see a little bit more precipitation. So flurries expected tomorrow in both Toronto and Ottawa, but look at that variation in temperature. 1 degree for the high in Toronto tomorrow, and Ottawa seeing a high of minus 7, minus 10 for the high tomorrow in Montreal with clear skies. As we look into Atlantic Canada, Fredericton seeing sunshine for the most part there, minus 14 the high, minus 9 in Halifax, minus 30% chance of flurries expected there. 60% chance is what Charlottetown's going to see tomorrow with a high of minus 11. 0 expected in St. John's tomorrow. Could see some drizzle and some flurries there. So there you have it. That is your forecast. A Regina lawyer has reached a settlement with Ticketmaster worth $6 million after filing a lawsuit against them back in 2018. The lawsuit, filed by Tony Merchant, accused Ticketmaster of drip pricing, where various fees were deceptively added onto the regularly priced ticket after checkout. A judge approved the formal settlement in December, and Ticketmaster will begin reimbursing customers up to $45 for those who bought tickets between January 1st and June 30th of 2018. The representative plaintiff will also receive an honorarium of $25,000. Customers across Canada outside of Quebec may soon receive an email providing a link to receive their $45 credit, which can only be used for one purchase. A recent report from online pet care marketplace Rover.com says Canadian pet parents feel their dogs and cats' costs were rising faster than inflation on human groceries. While any good owner wants to give their pet the best, experts say it shouldn't mean putting yourself in debt.
Having a dog or a cat, it's always been expensive, but it seems like it's only getting more so. In Canada, the cost of pet food overall is rising. I relied on a report last year from Rover.com. A lot of people know Rover as a site where they can find pet sitters and whatnot, but they do an annual report on the cost of pet care in Canada. And one of the highlights is that pet food specifically is rising in Canada. Dog and cat owners in Canada said that it seemed inflation of pet food was rising more quickly than human food. When it comes to pet food, a lot of people, people are learning on the fly. They make mistakes when it comes to how much they're feeding, what they're feeding. It's important not to overfeed. And sometimes you think you're giving the right amount based on what's on the back of the bag, the recommended feeding guidelines. Some vets will say, actually, that's too much. So it's good to get a check up with your vet once a year to kind of eyeball it, to do an examination. And you thought you were feeding your dog the right amount, you actually could scale back a bit, which not only is better for their health, but it will also save you some money on your bottom line too.
Be good to your pet. They'll love you for it. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 53 basis points today to 25,473. The Dow was down 136 points to 44,713. The S&P 500 was down 28 points to 6,039, and the Nasdaq was also down 101 points to 19,632. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 81 cents to 72.96 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 5 cents to 3.17 US. Gold was up 14 cents to 27.5929 US an ounce, and silver was up 45 cents to 30.83 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel, barley is at $6.58, canola is at $14.48, and corn is at $8.59 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was down $1.53 to $2.0703. Feeder cattle January contract was down $1.28 to $2.8055, and lean hogs February contract was left unchanged at $83.90. And the Canadian dollar remained unchanged over the past 24 hours and currently sits at $69.40 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith made it clear that all of Canada needs to act on border security immediately prior to the February 1st deadline when Trump is believed to commence tariffs. During a press conference today, she announced the measures Alberta is taking, including the deployment of a Black Hawk helicopter. Coming up after the break, I chat with Conservative MP for Lethbridge, Rachel Thomas, about Canada's approach in dealing with the tariff threats and other hot-button issues. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube page anytime to check out more of our interviews and stories. So there's a lot of anxiety and concern over U.S. President Trump's intentions to place a 25% tariff on Canadian exports. But how should Canada respond? Well, joining us to discuss this is Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas. Rachel, welcome back. Great to see you again.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
Wonderful. Okay, so Rachel, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says that diplomacy is the way to go with the tariff issue, but most other provinces and also most federal politicians are favoring retaliatory tariffs. So, Rachel, what do you think would be more effective?
Yeah, I think the key here is definitely a Canada First approach, which means ultimately we have to take a strong stand for ourselves as a sovereign country and make sure that Canadians are put first. This means standing up to President Trump, who is acting as a bit of a bully right now, and making sure that we have ways to do that. And so I think there's a few mechanisms at our disposal. Certainly, we could do retaliatory tariffs. We could even go dollar for dollar. And Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, has been really clear on how he would do that. So he would go after things that we don't need, things that we make ourselves here in Canada, things that we can buy elsewhere from other trading partners. And so in going about it in that way, what would happen is we would make sure that Canadians are protected and that they're not harmed in the process. But it would certainly send a clear message to the United States that we can't be bullied, we can't be pushed around. Other things that we need to do, though, as a country to make sure that we're standing up for ourselves is certainly energy development. So oil and gas, of course, is a very rich resource for us, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to get that to other markets in addition to the United States. And so we certainly need to look at that and take significant action in that regard. And then the other thing would just be like cut taxes, be a place where investment wants to go. And we know that where capital grows, capital will go. And so let's be that place. Let's be that place where regulatory burdens are not too much for businesses to thrive, where taxes are not driving them out the door. Let's be that place where dreams can come true, where capital can be invested, where risks can be taken, and where people can ultimately generate jobs for others. If we can become that, then we have a good opportunity at our fingertips to stand up for ourselves as a sovereign country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned Alberta there having the energy supply, the oil and gas. So that's kind of our big stick to hit back with, but that could put a huge economic hit on us in the meantime. So are there maybe some kinds of end run options or go arounds that we could utilize to work things out? Is it possible to see an Alberta special status of some kind?
Yeah, I think there's certainly an opportunity for us. Definitely Alberta is an energy-rich province, but I think it's important to remember that we are a part of a confederation, and so what is good for Alberta is good for the entire country. And so, of course, yes, Alberta should be looking to get its product to market, but also at the federal level, we need regulatory burdens to be taken away. We need things like Bill C-69 to be scrapped at the earliest possible time, and of course, Pierre Poilievre has promised to do that because that is a bill that is actually holding up the industry and preventing our resources from getting to market right now. And so if we're able to take care of some of those unnecessary burdens that the Liberal government has put in place, really we have a vibrant future ahead of us. And we know that countries like Germany, France, the UK have already expressed interest in natural gas, for example, LNG. We know that India would take our natural gas. We know that there's potential with Japan and with South Korea. So we have other markets that we can pursue and do extremely well with. We just need the will of the federal government, which currently we don't have under the Liberals, but certainly would have under a Conservative government. And so we would look forward to bringing those changes in place so that we're less reliant on the United States and, again, can stand up for ourselves as a sovereign nation.
Right. And I think a lot of people would agree with you that Canada needs to find those other nations to export our oil and gas to. Yeah. So, I mean, the problem is we have a federal government that's told nations like Germany that there's no business case for exports to Europe. So what needs to change in order to start exporting overseas?
I don't think there's any better business case than the sovereignty of our country and making sure that we have a leg to stand on when the neighbors to the south of us are trying to bully us or are trying to implement tariffs that would have a hugely detrimental effect on us. That's a business case in itself. But ultimately, the business case is the fact that we have the natural resource and we have the opportunity to get it to market. We have countries who are asking for it. So there's no more reason needed than that to start moving in that direction. Again, unfortunately, we have a leader at the helm right now with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. They just simply don't want it done. And so they're trying to put hurdles in place to prevent it. Conservatives think differently. We want to get our resources to market, and we're going to do all that we can to facilitate that.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there are other issues here in Canada other than the tariffs. I know the tariff talk is kind of top of mind these days, but Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says he wants to see immigrants with temporary visas who are guilty of hate crimes or violence to be deported. That kind of feels like Trump Part 2 right now. So your thoughts on this, Rachel?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Canada is a pro-immigration nation. We've always welcomed people from other countries. It's very much how we've been built as a country. However, we also believe in law and order. We believe in a justice system that is vibrant in nature, which means that ultimately our laws need to be upheld. And when they aren't, there are consequences. So when individuals are coming into Canada and they are living here on a work visa, let's say, they need to be held accountable in terms of their actions. And so if they are acting in a way that goes against the laws of our country, if they are perpetuating violence or instigating hate, causing harm to another individual, they need to be called to account on that. And so Pierre Poilievre has simply said, look, if individuals who are here on a temporary visa are not able to abide by our laws, if they are committing crimes against Canadian people, then they can be deported. They should, perhaps go back to their country of origin, because clearly they don't respect the values that we hold here in Canada and the laws that we've put in place to govern our country.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Speaking of hate crimes, we just observed the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and yet anti-Semitic hate continues in Canada, and I think Canadians are tired of it. So there are far too many, demonstrations calling for deaths to Jews, not to mention death to Canada, right? So, Rachel, how would a Conservative government deal with this?
Yeah, it actually breaks my heart just to watch what has transpired since October 7th, 2023 in particular. We've just seen hate crimes escalate across the country, and in particular against the Jewish community. Look, there's no place for that. There never has been a place. There certainly is no place now. When we say never again, which we often do when we refer to the Holocaust or when we commemorate, as we did just a few days ago, the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, when we say never again, we really need to mean that. Which means that our leaders need to make sure that their rhetoric doesn't perpetuate the situation, which in this case, I would argue that Justin Trudeau and many of his cabinet ministers, either through their silence or by saying the wrong thing, actually did allow for or even instigated ill actions to be taken against the Jewish community. The opposite was needed. We needed a leader. We do still need a leader, I should say, who is actually going to stand up for the rights of all Canadians, and in particular, the Jewish community in this case, which is extremely vulnerable. And we need to make sure that they are granted safety. Look, when a business is burned to the ground because it's owned by a Jewish individual, that's wrong. When individuals are blockaded from their neighborhood because it's a Jewish community, that's wrong. When there are drive-by shootings on schools because they are Jewish students, that's wrong. And when these things have happened, which they all have, Prime Minister Trudeau has been nowhere to be seen. And in fact, his cabinet ministers have come out and said atrocious things. And so, look, at the end of the day, we need leadership that is going to stand up for the rights of the Jewish people, for the rights of Israel to exist and to defend itself.
All right. Turning our eyes more locally here, Lethbridge continues to see drug addiction and crime associated with the homeless population. And the number of encampments saw a huge increase last November in the downtown core. So what help should the federal government be providing for these problems, Rachel?
Yeah, I appreciate the question because it's certainly one that I'm hearing from people within the Lethbridge area quite consistently. There's great concern from those in our community. People want to know what can be done or what is going to be done. They're feeling unsafe because of the increased level of crime and chaos that is transpiring. A lot of that has to do with weakened laws at the federal level under the Justin Trudeau Liberals. In addition to that, though, there's also been this release of greater of hard drugs. There's been almost a normalcy put to it, and so as a result, we've seen increased overdose deaths. So since Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, 47,000 Canadians have died because of drug overdose. That's a 200% increase since 2016. And so our loved ones deserve better. People deserve a second chance, which means that ultimately they deserve access to treatment and to recovery options. And that's what we want to offer as Conservatives. We want to offer that chance to take back one's life. We want to offer a chance for loved ones to be brought home drug-free. And so that's what we're committed to as Conservatives.
You're in a challenging time right now because the federal government has prorogued Parliament and is currently holding a leadership race. So do you think having a new leader will make any difference for the Liberals, Rachel?
Well, I think it's important to note, first of all, that the reason Parliament is prorogued, which means a big pause button has been pushed, the reason why we're not doing any government business is because Justin Trudeau decided to stop Parliament so that the Liberal Party of Canada could run its internal leadership race. I think it's important for people to understand that this actually has nothing to do with the order of government or business of government, I should say, but everything to do with partisan politics. And so it's actually really sad that the mechanism was ill used in this case. Nevertheless, to get to your question, I think the Liberals are going to go through their leadership race. We know that the top two contenders are Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney. We know that both of these are Liberal insiders. Chrystia Freeland has been a minister for 9 years under Justin Trudeau. Mark Carney has been right at his right shoulder, advising Justin Trudeau throughout his time in government. Carney wrote a book praising Trudeau for the carbon tax, for example. He's also been on side with regards to the legalization of hard drugs and other destructive economic policies that Trudeau has put in place. So your question is, will things be different? No. Mark is simply a Liberal insider. Chrystia Freeland is a Liberal insider. These are two individuals who have very much been a part of the decision-making process up to this point. Why would things change?
Right, exactly. And of course, Mark Carney is saying that he's an outsider, but he will do things differently. So is he different? No, is what you're saying. Not at all.
No, I think the proof is in the pudding. And like I said, he wrote an entire book outlining his position on things, and they are in alignment with Trudeau and the actions that have been taken by the Liberal Party of Canada over the last 9 years. And so for Mark Carney to come in and claim that he's an outsider is incredibly disingenuous and misleading.
Yeah, interesting. It's also interesting that some of the Liberal leadership candidates seem to be saying that they're open to dumping that carbon tax and replacing it with something else. So any ideas as to what some of their potential proposals might look like?
Well, I think what they've offered is that they're going to replace it with a tax that instead of applying it to the individuals in Canada, they're going to apply it to businesses, they've said. But we know better than that. Canadians are smarter than that because, of course, we know that if the tax is going to be applied to corporations or businesses, those corporations or businesses are going to have to pass that cost down to the consumer. So ultimately, it's still going to land on the backs of Canadians, just in a slightly different way. So Canadians are not going to be better off under this policy. It's still a carbon tax, just dealt a little differently. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, look, this is what Conservatives have to offer. It's really clear, it's really simple, and that is we're going to axe the carbon tax for everyone for all time. Done deal, full stop.
Okay. So when do you think the next federal election will actually take place? Will the NDP let them stay in power over the summer, do you think?
Yeah, I think this is the big question, of course, that Canadians are wanting answered. I think it's the question that, all of us as parliamentarians are asking here on the Hill as well. At the end of the day, Jagmeet Singh said that he was done. He was ripping up his contract with the Liberals. He was no longer going to be on side with them starting in September of 2024. However, only a few days later, he began once again voting in favor with the current government and making sure that the Liberals stayed in power. And here we are yet again. He is starting to talk about the spring session and the opportunity that he has in front of him to once again prop up the Liberals. So it would look like Jagmeet Singh is perhaps wavering again on his commitment to bring down the government and actually maybe wants to prop them up. And so if that's the case, then, an election could be quite some time away. But what I can tell you is that Conservatives, at the very first opportunity that we're given, we will be moving a vote of non-confidence. And of course, our hope is that the Bloc will stand with us and that Jagmeet Singh will put the Canadian people ahead of himself and that he will vote with us as well.
Looks like we're out of time here, but thanks so much for your time today, Rachel. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you.
Rachel Thomas is the Conservative Member of Parliament for Lethbridge. Charter rights and freedoms. Some people say these were overridden during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many Canadian judges ruled that this was justified, but was it? The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms doesn't think so, and Attorney John Carpay joins us from Calgary. He is the president of the Justice Centre, and he has a new book out called Corrupted by Fear: How the Charter Was Betrayed and What Canadians can do about it. The book is available on Amazon. John, welcome. Good to see you.
Glad to be with you.
Okay, so before we get to talking about your new book, JCCF is also working on a very interesting court case on the legality of the prorogation of Parliament. Now, I understand the case has been expedited, and many believe the Liberals prorogued simply to have a leadership race. So can you explain how this case will proceed and if there's any chance of winning?
Well, as everybody may recall, on January the 6th, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, prorogued Parliament, which basically is to shut down Parliament, but without an election following it. Right. And it was for the benefit of the Liberal Party to have its leadership race. And our argument before the federal court is that this is an abuse of prorogation. Shutting down Parliament should only be done when Parliament has fully finished its business, and it should not be used as a tool for the benefit of one political party. It should be done only in the national interest. And so we secured an initial court ruling to get this expedited, because usually these cases take months, years. And so the court is going to be hearing oral argument on February 13th and 14th, and we could be getting a decision as early as February 17th. And if the court rules in our favor, then Parliament would go right back into where it was, and there could be a non-confidence vote and an immediate election.
Yeah. Now, Parliament, of course, resumes on March 24th. So do you think this court case could actually be decided before then? Hoping.
Yeah,
right?
we could. Well, we're filing our written materials in the first week of February, so is the federal government. And then February 13th and 14th, there's oral argument. So Monday, February 17th, we could have a ruling that sets aside prorogation. And if the ruling is in our favor, then Parliament has to resume immediately the following day or the day thereafter.
Okay, so if you win, that's what happens then?
Yes.
Okay.
Parliament goes right. The court will declare that the prorogation was not legal, and therefore we will behave as though it never existed because it was not valid from the first place, which means that Parliament could go back into session and we could get a non-confidence vote triggering an election.
Yeah, interesting. Now, if you lose, what message does that send to the Canadian public and to politicians?
It's a novel case, so the law in Canada is not clear on what exactly is the Prime Minister's power to shut down Parliament. There's no clear law on it. We have an interesting precedent from the United Kingdom, which is persuasive, but the court need not follow it. In 2019, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson prorogued Parliament. That was for only 5 weeks, not 11 weeks as in Canada. And the court said that the prorogation was illegal, and Parliament came right back to work the next day. And so we have an interesting precedent that we are putting before the court, and it's going to provide some clarity in Canadian law on this topic.
Oh my gosh, it will be so interesting to see what happens there, John, for sure. Okay, let's get into your book here. So, Corrupted by Fear. What's it about? Who's it for? What do you hope readers are going to take home with this one?
But the title of the book comes from many public meetings which the Justice Center held across Canada in 2022, especially, and a lot of people said, "What's up with these judges? These judges are issuing court rulings saying that the violations of our charter freedoms of association, conscience, religion, travel, bodily autonomy, our rights and freedoms are being violated, and the judges are ruling that these are justified violations." Are the judges getting paid off? Are they getting thick wads of $100 bills? Are they getting a threatening phone call from the Prime Minister or from the World Economic Forum? What's up with these judges? And so my answer is no, I don't think judges are getting thick wads of $100 bills, and I don't think they're getting threatening phone calls. But the rulings really are atrocious because you have, I provide examples in the book where judges make assertions in their rulings. They're not supported by evidence that was placed before the court. They're simply repeating what they heard on the 6 o'clock news. And so my thesis is that the judges, as well as politicians and the medical establishment and the government-funded media, they were all corrupted by fear. People got very scared of COVID, and people who are very afraid don't think clearly. They don't debate logically. And so we have this excessive and unwarranted fear of COVID clouds people's thinking, and so people are corrupted by fear.
And your book certainly gives readers a history lesson, doesn't it, John? So we're looking at Nazi Germany having some interesting similarities. It looks like, you know, the media, the church, other political parties, they all bought into that use of fear tactics, is what you're saying, and no one seemed to ask any tough questions. So it seems like the public decided they needed big government to protect them at the expense of individual freedoms?
Yeah, the first quarter of the book looks at how the legal profession in Germany in the 1930s repudiated the rule of law. Lawyers and judges did not come to the defense of the fundamental freedoms of citizens to vote in elections, to speak freely, to think freely, to practice their religion. Everything was put behind this ideology of National Socialism, which was fully embraced by the lawyers and the judges. And Hitler was a masterful user of fear to manipulate people and to acquire power and to maintain power. And the churches ultimately got persecuted by Hitler, but they were preaching this, you know, you always obey every law unquestioningly, unthinkingly, must obey every law, which cover that, and that's not what the Bible teaches. And so the first quarter of the book is about history that has valuable lessons that we can learn from and that we should learn from.
Yeah, and we're seeing this pattern, or we have seen this pattern of judges ruling that yes, citizens' charter rights were in fact violated, but that it was justified. So can you explain how this is supposed to work?
Well, the government is supposed to present the court with cogent and persuasive evidence to justify demonstrably, as the charter says it, demonstrably justify any health order that violates one or more of these freedoms of religion, conscience, so on and so forth. But what happened, for example, in the Gateway versus Manitoba case, the judge claims in his ruling, he says, COVID was unprecedented and it was the worst global pandemic in over a century. Both claims are false. COVID was not unprecedented. We had the Spanish flu of 1918 was about 100 times as deadly as COVID. And then we had the Asian flu of 1957, the Hong Kong flu of 1968, both of which were more deadly than COVID. And yet the judge writes these falsehoods into his judgment, and there's no evidence before the court to support it. So this is what we were up against, where judges are ignoring evidence that's before the court and just quoting what they heard on the news, and then lowering the bar for government. And so the standard was lowered where the judges ruled, and this happened in multiple rulings, The government doesn't really need to provide cogent evidence to justify demonstrably. They just need to put forward some scientific evidence.
So why were judges failing to hold governments accountable?
Well, it's frightening, and this is I don't know for sure because I can't get into their heads and their hearts. But my thesis is corrupted by fear. The judges got so scared of COVID because there was the fear mongering on the news, falsely claiming that COVID was far worse than what it really was. The government's data tell us it was like a bad annual flu. That's not my opinion. That's the government's own data. But the media, it was 24-hour media, like around the clock, every hour you get these scary photographs of people that are sick and dying. And so I think that the judges got as corrupted by fear as the rest of the Canadian population did.
Yeah. So what did the statistics actually tell us about how bad COVID actually was in hindsight?
Well, one of the things in one of our court cases, the same one, the Gateway versus Manitoba, our expert evidence debunked the use of PCR testing, which is polymerase chain, which is based on getting a positive result from COVID by doubling and then doubling again and redoubling a viral remnant. So we exposed how these numbers of COVID cases did not refer to people who are actually sick because the PCR test cannot diagnose COVID. And yet the governments just relied on this PCR testing and came out with these large numbers of COVID cases, which in many cases included people who were not sick. So these are among the things that we exposed in the court rulings. And the judges responded by saying, well, the government's evidence is better, but they would never explain why they thought the government's evidence was better.
Yeah, and of course, like they would always say, trust the science, but it seemed like the science was always changing. So now government agencies have admitted that certain measures that were taken were not, in fact, based on sound science. For example, the social distancing. I think even Fauci came out and said that he didn't know where that came from. It wasn't him that originally said it, but somehow it caught on and became a thing.
Well, and the same with mask wearing. I mean, if you had asked 100 doctors in 2019, can a cloth mask over your mouth stop the spread of an airborne virus? And close to 100 would have said, like, no, of course not. If you had asked 100 doctors in 2019, can you stop the spread of a virus? Almost all of them would say no. You could slow it down temporarily, maybe, but you can't stop a virus from spreading everywhere. And this was just thrown out the window in 2020 with lockdowns, and not based on scientific breakthroughs, but it was false fear mongering that the medical establishment also bought into.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you mentioned lockdowns there, and I think one of the questions that needed to be asked, I think, was did lockdowns actually save lives? And on the flip side, did our governments ever compile a list of how many Canadians suffered or died as a result of lockdown, isolation, and delayed medical treatment?
Well, this is one of the problems, how Canadian judges have lowered the bar for government. One of the things that government should be required to do, and was previously required to do, is if you have a law that violates, say, your freedom of expression, the government has to provide evidence to show that that law is doing more good than harm. And this is part of a test that has been used for decades. And what happened here was the judges said to the government, relieve the government of the responsibility of showing that health orders actually produced more good than harm. So governments didn't even look at the harm of lockdowns, all of the drug overdoses and the suicides and the loneliness, the isolation, the lost income, the unemployment. Like none of those harms were seriously taken into account by governments. And then the courts kind of just gave a stamp of approval, even though the governments had not demonstrated that lockdowns did more good than harm.
And, getting back to the mask argument, I mean, there is, I guess, the argument to say that mask can maybe prevent a little bit of spread. I mean, especially if it's a fresh mask. I mean, they wear them in the hospitals. They wear them during surgery. They must do something, right?
But the surgery masks are not like just a piece of cloth that we put over our face. I would agree with you. If somebody's sneezing, then yeah, a cloth mask is going to, probably keep some particles out. But in terms of preventing COVID, I mean, trying to stop COVID with a cloth mask is like trying to stop mosquitoes by putting up a chain link fence. The mosquitoes are a lot smaller than the individual holes in the chain link fence, and the same way the COVID particles are so tiny that they're not going to be stopped by a cloth mask.
Right. Yeah. And then, of course, your book mentions the trust the science when it comes to the safety and efficacy research done on the vaccines. And a lot of that research was paid for by the vaccine companies themselves. Right, John?
Well, and the scariest thing was that in September of 2021, we had one judge, Michael McGaw in Saskatchewan, who was appointed to the court by Stephen Harper, not by Trudeau. Michael McGaw said that he took judicial notice of the fact that vaccines are safe and effective for adults and children, so that no proof is required before the court, because he just declared that to be a fact. And he ordered a 12-year-old girl to get injected with the mRNA vaccine. Fortunately, the mom won on appeal. But this is really scary to think that a judge who's supposed to be reviewing evidence declares that no evidence is required, that in his court ruling he says it is a fact that vaccines are safe and effective, because he says the Saskatchewan Health Authority and Health Canada said that the vaccines are safe and effective, and that should be good enough. Anybody who questions Health Canada or the Saskatchewan Health Authority is an unreasonable person who need not be listened to. That kind of fanaticism, that's really scary to find that in a court ruling.
John, we are so out of time here because there's just so much to unpack there, but we thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me on your show.
John Carpe is the author of Corrupted by Fear: How the Charter Was Betrayed and What Canadians Can Do About It. It is available on Amazon. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.